Okay, welcome back. In this video, we are going to do, we're going to do the next two groups together, okay? I think by now, so we've done 어-verbs, we've done 어-verbs, we've done 으-verbs, and we're starting to recognize the pattern, okay? I think by now it sort of makes sense. And so we're going to do these two together, okay? We're going to do 어-verbs and we're going to do 으-verbs, okay? And then in the last group, we're going to do 이-verbs. I saved that one for its own, just because you know when it's a verb that ends in a vowel, it's got that contraction of sound. Well, that one it looks really different, even though it's still following that same general idea of a contraction of sound. It looks really different. So I do that one on its own, and I'm also going to introduce a new sentence structure in that one as well. Okay. So today we're going to do 어 and 으. Okay. The first verb I'm going to start with is 없다. Okay, and this verb is one of the most common verbs in the language, okay? This isn't necessarily the form most people are familiar with. You might be more familiar with the word 없어요, okay? That is this, but 없어요 is in its conjugated form, okay? Now this basically means, so I'm going to give you the positive of this, 있다 or 있어요, okay? 있어요 talks about the existence of something, okay? So if I walked in and said, 맥주 있어요, okay, is there any beer? It could also mean, do you have, okay? Contextually, is there or do you have, okay? Both, it'll do both. But it's talking about the existence of something, okay? Does that exist here? Do you have this here, okay? And 없어요 is the negative of that, okay? It doesn't exist or I don't have, okay? And we'll see more examples of this later on, okay? So, 없다 ends in a consonant, so we're going to drop the da again as we always do. So we've got our common and our casual forms, okay? So, going back to the clock theory, just a super quick review. O and a brought in an a, okay? And the rest of them, when they conjugate, bring in an o, okay? So this being in the o group, it's going to bring in an o, okay? So we have our verb here, up, and then we bring in an o. And now for sound, this s is going to carry through, okay? You don't write it like this, but essentially it sounds exactly like this, okay? 없어, okay? But it is not written like that, okay? So, 없어. And then we want to make it in the common level, okay? Make it a bit more polite. We put the yo, 없어요. Okay? You want to make it in the casual level, okay? 없어. So, our unchanged form, our unconjugated form is up, okay? And when you say it in that form, the S sound is not gonna come out. It's just gonna sort of not even exist, okay? Up, and then our changed form or conjugated form is 없어, okay? So now let's put this into our future form, okay? Okay, so our future form, we know we use the unchanged form, and then we add 을 거예요, okay? Because this ends in a consonant, we've got to bring out that 을, okay? 을 거예요. And then in the past tense, we know the past tense is using the changed form, the S is going underneath, and we add 써요. Okay, so this is 없었어요. Okay, now it starts to get really heavy on the S's because there's a few in there. So the present tense, 없어요. The past tense, 없었어요. Okay, you've got those two S's in there. Those two S sounds coming out. 없었어요. Okay, hope that's clear. Let's go on to the next verb, which is an 어-verb that ends in a consonant, in a vowel. Okay, we're going to take the verb 서다, meaning to stand, okay? So, dropping the da, we're left with 서, and then, as our rule says, we're going to bring in, so 서 plus 어, okay? So, and now again, we're going to have that contraction of sound. 서, 어. It's the exact same vowel sound, 서. Now, if you remember back to when we did the 어-verbs, we did kada, okay, ka ending in a vowel, we brought in our a, and the sound just contracted down, and it just became ha. Okay, this basically just disappeared because it's the exact same sound. So the same thing is going to happen here. Okay, so just becomes so. Okay, and to make it more polite, soyo and so. Okay. Now I should say this verb is actually used together with other verbs quite a lot, as opposed to just being used on its own like this. Not to say you can't, but in most times in natural conversation it will be. Okay. Not terribly important for now though, and what we're doing. So the unchanged form, okay, again, this is one that's quite easy like this one. The unchanged form is so, and the changed form is so. They are exactly the same, okay? Which means that both our past and future will take the exact same form. Okay, now this is another example where attaching the future form to this might not be the most common structure in the world, because again, this might be used jointly with another verb when you're doing it this way, but that's okay. Okay, it's not right now. What we're doing is just trying to understand how to plug any verb into the future tense. Okay, that's the skill we're looking for. So put the L underneath. 쏠 거예요. Okay, and then here putting the double S's underneath. 섰어요. Okay, so that is that verb, and that is our 어-verbs. Let's move on and let's do our 으-verbs, okay? The first one we're going to do is 만들다, okay, which means to make. 만들다, okay? So, dropping the da, we are left with 만들, okay? So, we can see this ends in a consonant. Now, this being in the group, it brings in, okay, it's not an R-O, so we know it brings in an O, okay? So, 만들 brings in an O. 만들어, okay? Put our yo on just to be polite, and then the casual form is just exactly that without the yo, okay? So, and I'm going through this a little bit fast now because, again, I think we've seen this pattern. If I am going too fast, if you're still confused, again, use the questions box down below. Otherwise, the unchanged, unconjugated form, 만들, okay? And there is actually going to be a little bit special because it has an L here, but that's stuff that we can say for later also. For what we're doing, this is totally fine, okay? And then our changed form is 만들어, okay? So let's go over to the future form. 만들, and our past form using the changed form. So this one's actually here's a great example about this being a little bit special. So 만들, and then we know the future form brings in an L. Now what we don't need to do in this case is add this extra. We don't need to say 만들 거예요. Okay, we don't need to say that. This ends in an L, and it will suffice to say 만들 and then just put 거예요. Okay, that will be totally fine. Okay, and that's one thing a little special about verbs that end in allele. Okay, and then past tense. 만들었, and we put our S's underneath. Okay, 만들었어요. Okay. Now you may have noticed by now that for the past tense, the future tense, where sometimes the L can go underneath, sometimes it has to come out because it ends in a consonant. That's never, ever, ever going to happen in the past tense because the past tense uses the change form, and as we're seeing, the way to conjugate into the change form, it's always going to end in a vowel. It's always going to end in O or A. Okay, which means these S's are always going to slide underneath, okay? So the past tense will always have the S's underneath like this, okay? So, 만들었어요. Moving on, let's do our next verb that ends in a vowel. Okay? We're going to take the verb 크다, okay? Now, 크다 actually means, sorry, I'll make that a bit more clear for you. 크다 is one of our adjectives in verb form, okay, or our descriptive verbs, okay, and this means to be big, okay. So coming down here, so this is also a group where this is why I really explain it as it's a contraction of sound, okay? Because based on the way it's going to look that we're going to see here in a second, you wouldn't really be able to say, oh, well, how does it become that? Unless you understand this concept that it's not just becoming that, it's a contraction of sound. It already is that, okay? It's just now we write it to represent that, okay? So let's look at what I mean exactly. So we have k, okay? And then we bring in our okay? So k plus okay? Now if I wrote this just together, okay? K, okay? K, and then if you started doing it quickly, k, okay? You know, so let's go back to a couple we've already seen where we had oda, and then we brought in an and so owa, it contracted down to become wa, just all contracted. This became one of those vowel combinations. Well, if we did that here, okay, we would have that. Now this vowel combination doesn't exist in the language, okay? You don't have a k, that doesn't exist, okay? So what's going to happen here, and this is kind of a jump, and this is why I was talking about what I was just saying, you know, about really understanding the contraction of sound, is that this becomes ko. Okay, this underneath just disappears, and this all takes over. Because again, if you said this quick enough, ko. Okay, the main vowel sound you're hearing there is o. So basically, it just becomes ko. Okay. So our unchanged form, and before I do that, to make this polite, okay, koyo. Okay, you may have heard the expression to be tall, kiga koyo. Okay. And that's exactly what that is. And then our casual form is the exact same, just dropping the yo, okay? So our unchanged form, k, okay? And our changed form, ko, okay? And let's look at that in the future and past tense, okay? K, ko, okay? So future form, this ends in a vowel, we can just put the L or the lil underneath, okay? 클 거예요. And this one being our changed form, to make the past tense, we put the S's underneath, okay? Okay, here, 클 거예요, okay? And 컸어요. Good, that is it. So you can jump into the workbook, try these. You're going to see some of these verbs as well, okay? There's not actually, in terms of like super common verbs, there's not actually that many that fit into these two groups. I mean, there are, but in terms of the most common ones, there aren't so many, which is another reason I've actually joined them in together. But you can jump in and do that, and then jump into the sentence building practice.